Excellent. So welcome to you, Andy, and welcome to the people joining, which is happening as we speak. And we're back with RSM Live. It's been a while since I did one, actually. So I've been missing everybody. I'm sure you haven't been missing me. Now, I was going to try and pretend that I was also up in Manchester as part of the new way of doing things, that we are all moving up there. But if I'm not, but I would like to have been Manchester. My mother used to play for the Halle for many years. I'm very familiar with it. It's the birthplace of many of the heroes of the Labour movement, Andy. Emmeline Pankhurst, Robert Owen, even David Lloyd George. I never knew that. He was born there. Frederick Engels and the Communist Manifesto. But now it's most famous because Andy Burnham is the mayor of Manchester. And congratulations on your re-election, Andy. You must be.
Thank you, Simon.
Well, yeah. So now then, Andy. So where should we start? Well, we tend to start with something fairly topical. We can't be more topical than what's the Prime Minister's just been announcing. When you took over as mayor in 2017, I mean, you must have expected sooner or later you're going to be tested by events, and you have to really do so with the horrific murders at the arena. But I don't suppose you ever imagined anything like the pandemic. What are you feeling today?
No, I thought I was signing up for a quieter life when I left Westminster, but it hasn't quite turned out like that, Simon. Yeah, there's been real tragedy. We also had wildfires, you might remember, in the summer of 2018 on the Demdare Hills outside Greater Manchester, which was a big thing. And then, yes, into the pandemic and lots of other incidents along the way. So it's been a bit of an up and down ride, but you know, it's been intense. But you know, I've kind of found that the role really well. I hope it comes over that it suits me really, and you know, when you're in a place that you know and people that you care about, and you're just confident of your ground, if you know what I mean. It just, you can face big and difficult things, I think, with more confidence, I think, and hopefully that's what I've been able to do.
I mean, during the pandemic, you've had moments in which you've been a bit at odds with how should we put it, the government and your own stamping ground Department of Health. How's that felt for you?
It's certainly something I didn't seek. People make the opposite criticism, that it was grandstanding, and I can absolutely assure you it was the opposite. When I came into this role, I created a new rule for myself, which was, you know, the point of these roles is not to come into them and do exactly what people in Westminster do, because you know it's not the point of the role. The role's about the place first, not the party first. And so I kind of created a what do you call it? A sort of a set of personal sort of rules where I said, if the government get it right, I will say so. But if they don't, I will equally use my political experience to say so as effectively as I can. And I would kind of defend myself anywhere in saying I've stuck pretty rigidly to that principle. So there've been moments where I've praised people in the government or decisions of the government, and that has even happened during the pandemic. But where they do what they like to do or have a habit of doing, which is treat the North as a place that they can just, you know, kind of almost treat with disdain, or treat people here as second-class citizens, as I felt they were doing last year in the Tier 3 debate, then I'll let them know about it. And I know Whitehall doesn't like to be answered back, particularly by the North, but it is being answered back now. And I think that's a healthy thing for the country, to be honest, because you know, we are a divided country. We have a North-South divide because of the way Whitehall has treated the North over centuries. So, you know, this is, I think, the right way to go about it, Simon. And so they don't like it. And the minute you use your voice, it's called point scoring or grandstanding. But I'm pretty confident where I've done it, it's been justified.
And remind us, I mean, it was only last year, wasn't it? But I mean, it seems such a long time ago already. Did you get your way? I mean, I think you did, but tell us a bit more.
No, we did. I mean, to back up what I was just saying, I was working for weeks behind the scenes asking them not to impose tier 3 on us without giving us support. And the background was, and I think people had forgotten this, we were under restrictions from July, and they were effectively what became tier 2 restrictions. So people couldn't visit each other in their homes, and businesses were suffering as a result of that. That was us from July, and the rest of the world was going. I was remembering being in London in September, and the world was merrily going about its business, not really aware of what was going on in Greater Manchester. Then later in September, Bolton had hospitality closed overnight without any compensation, and that caused massive upset, as you might imagine. And then we got into October and the whole debate about tier 3, and there was a Times headline that said pubs to shut across the north. It was kind of the first sign that we were heading into a really difficult place. And I started saying to them, well, as ever, we will accept restrictions where the public health argument justifies them. And we could see why the government was saying what they were saying. But we will not accept a situation where we're closed down without sufficient support for people. And the specific thing, or the headline thing, Simon, was the Treasury had said they would offer a 67% furlough to the staff in the pubs and the betting shops and the bingo halls that were being closed, but no more. And I said, well, that fails a straightforward fairness test, because there's a lot of other people off work on an 80% furlough or working from home, well, not at work on an 80% furlough. How on earth can you say, well, just because this is a regional lockdown, that people get 2/3? And obviously, if you work in a pub or in a betting shop, the likelihood is you're on the living wage, or even lower, the minimum wage, and you can't. It's harder to live on 2/3 of the minimum wage than it is to live on 2/3 of a comfortable middle income salary. So that was the argument. And actually, days after it ended, they were forced to put London into tier 2, and they were forced to concede that tier 2 should attract financial support, which is one of the points I've been arguing to the government. And then a few days beyond that, they went into a national lockdown, and then they paid the full furlough to everybody, and the self-employed support, which they also weren't offering to people in Greater Manchester. So in the end, we ended up with what we were arguing for, but it was a pretty bruising experience.
And to be fair, you had another argument almost in the opposite direction, if memory serves me rightly, when with the lifting, the sudden lifting, wasn't it, in Bolton? Was it in Bolton? I'm sure it must have been Bolton, wasn't it? In September, you actually felt that was actually going too fast. Did I just make that up, or did you?
We had an argument about the first lockdown. I don't know if you're thinking about that. So we
I am actually
absolutely believed that the first lockdown was lifted too soon. I remember the time, I think it was late May last year, almost having my breath taken away. It doesn't happen often in politics, because I kind of expect bad and strange things to happen all the time. But this one really did nearly knock me off my chair when my director of communication said the government was going to change stay at home to stay alert. Honestly, I couldn't believe what they were saying, because of the case rate in the north. It was a very different picture where we, if you remember, Simon, it had been London that had experienced the first wave of cases, then it had gone up through the Midlands, and so we had our wave about 3 or 4 weeks later. So we were not out of the woods when we got to late May, but the British system, as it is, doesn't see that far north. It can only see within the M25, and we were to be lifted with everybody when we were kind of saying, no, this is too early. And I think that explains why we were back under restrictions in July. They lifted it too early in the north, and then we couldn't get out. We were trapped with a high case rate. I mean, of course, it's linked to the high levels of deprivation that you have concentrated across the north. Of course, it is linked to that, but it is also connected to the fact that the first lockdown was lifted too early for us.
Okay. Several people with a sense of humor are suggesting that you got trapped on the M60. Was it you on the M62 or an M6? Anyway,
M6,
M6. Okay. Just to make the point about rail links and smart motorways, which I was going to ask you later, but
if I was a more calculating, effective politician, I would agree with them. I definitely. I'm afraid this was all. I left early. I thought, right, so even for me to leave the office at 6:15 because I was meant to sign on with you at 7:15. That was massive planning on my part. But no,
we are glad to have you. But I mean, it is a good cue anyway, because people have mentioned that. So I was going to end with that, but we might as well talk about that now. I think it wasn't hard to tell that you were not at all pleased with the news. When was it? 3 or 4 weeks ago, on the train links. You didn't take much effort to hide your irritation, to put it mildly.
Because I've kind of bought into levelling up. So I've given them the benefit of the doubt, actually, over a number of years now. It was George Osborne who first promised us HS3 in 2014. And it was kind of hard, really, to, have to say, well, if they do this, this has got to be something that we will support. But we did say, and have said that, actually, for those 7 years in between. Every manifesto, the Conservative manifesto, since then, there have been 3 of them have promised us a new line across the north, a crossrail of the north, some people call it, and it's not lost on us that crossrail is soon to open. So where's our east-west line? And honestly, if you ask people up here, Simon, about what is our highest transport priority, it's east-west connectivity across the north. North-south is okay, it works all right. But what doesn't work is getting across the country. It takes 3 hours to get from Manchester to Newcastle on the train, which is ridiculous. And you mentioned the M62 a moment ago. If you go on there any day, you will see it is absolutely saturated with traffic because people can't rely on the trains getting across the country. So to have those repeated promises of a new line, and then to find out we're being given half a new line that gets merged with Victorian creaking infrastructure somewhere outside of Huddersfield, it's the same old story. It's like, and then when we moaned, it was like, well, the North should be grateful for what it's being given. It's getting 90 something. Yeah. We're not getting 90 something billion. It was much less than that. And it isn't what we've been repeatedly promised. And it isn't what we need. To leave a city the size of Bradford out on a limb, which is what is the situation here, is just plain wrong. It really is wrong. Bradford deserves modern connectivity. They're very connected to Manchester, actually, and it's unjustifiable, I think. So we are unhappy about it. Why does it keep happening, Simon? Well, here's my confessional bit for you. I was the chief secretary to the Treasury that funded Crossrail in London. That's true, and it's a myth that I don't love London, Simon. I can assure you, I do. And there you are. There's evidence of my commitment. But I've often talked about being a chief secretary at that time when I was doing that, and I said to the civil servants in the Treasury, "Well, give me a list of the Northern Rail projects I can announce alongside Crossrail." And I kept asking, and in the end, they had to admit that there weren't any. Why weren't there any? Because the Green Book that the Treasury uses, which is the test for major projects or major public investment, basically sets a sort of 25-year return on investment time frame. And because of that, it will always be projects in parts of the country where the economy is stronger that will score more highly. So we've been running a policy in this country of, in some ways, giving more to more. We've been overheating London and the southeast, and we've been underinvesting in the north because of the Green Book. That's been since the demise of traditional industry here all those years ago. I think we've been trying to kind of really build the London and southeast economy. Now, I'm not necessarily against building it, but balance it. And the Green Book, as I learned when I was chief secretary, doesn't do that. So consequently, we keep failing these tests. And the rail minister stood in the Commons after the rail line had been abandoned and said it wasn't. When someone said, "Why isn't it linking Manchester, Bradford, and Leeds?" It didn't make economic sense to do that. Was the phrase? Well, I'm sorry. Speak to businesses in Manchester, Bradford, and Leeds, and tell them it doesn't make economic sense to give us a modern rail connection that kind of will reduce the hours and hours and hours people spend on trains here or on motorways.
Okay. I remember my mother always getting trapped by the snake pass. When there was any
Well,
snow
I
or
wouldn't want to
anything.
be on there tonight. I can assure you.
No, but she was.
Yeah.
Yeah, she was always on the drive between the two.
Yeah.
Fair enough. I think you said this was a championship solution when you were expecting a Premier League. But the Championship's a pretty good league, actually. I think we've been a bit generous, weren't you?
I was being a bit too generous. The more I looked into it, it's distinctly League One, possibly even League Two. I think the more I've looked at it.
Yeah.
But, sorry, I went off on a long one there, but it's just
no.
It's frustrating, honestly, because all those years in Westminster. I mean, you remember. I mean, I was a bit of a stuck record, and people used to take the mickey out of me for being a professional Northerner, and I am. I don't mind admitting it. I am quite happy to own up to that. But I learned in that world as chief secretary and then fighting for the Hillsborough families and various other things, just how the voice of the North does not get equal treatment in that world. It really doesn't. I mean, I can speak with absolute personal experience of that. I remember as a health minister when we were creating the first academic health research centres, relevant topic for the audience tonight. And I won't name the civil servant, but this person will be known to all of you on this call. Put forward the list of the 5 that I was meant to approve as minister: Oxford, Cambridge, and 3 in London. And I just said, look, no, you've got to break out the golden triangle if you're to change the country. And it caused such a furore. I remember
I definitely remember that.
And we, in the end, got a 6 added in Manchester. But honestly, it's just so frustrating. And I kind of left there to sort of say, well, actually, devolution is our chance to give the North of England a stronger voice. And I think we are getting a stronger voice through it, but it still feels to me that the default setting of, let the North be grateful for what it's given is kind of deep rooted in Whitehall, and actually hardwired into the way Whitehall works through the Green Book and other policies. Okay,
so I've just completely forgotten what I was about to ask you there. I've literally just lost my thread. Oh yeah, I do remember now. I'm still when you were still in government, you were obviously Secretary of State for Health, and you were Culture, Media and Sport, weren't you, as well? Yes.
Right, absolutely.
You mentioned Hillsborough, and people are also asking about that, and because I think it was, both one of your best moments, I think people would say. And I've just gone and looked again at the YouTube of you talking at the 20th commemoration of Hillsborough. And do you want to just talk us through that? Because it is an extraordinary, if anyone hasn't seen it, they need to watch that. And then the 25th. And the 20th was tricky, I think it's fair to say.
It was, and it's a hard watch to watch it back, but it was, and in some ways it was not. In some ways it was the biggest turning point in my life, in that I'd been 19 on the day that Hillsborough happened. I'd been at the other semi-final watching Everton versus Norwich. I'd been in the pub the night before with a huge number of my friends where I grew up, who were Liverpool supporters, who were all going to Hillsborough. And the conversation that night, the Friday before, was, how on earth are you back at that ground in that away end? Because they'd had a terrible time the year before in the tunnel leading into the pens. And this was what we were all talking about. And then being at Villa Park that afternoon and seeing flash up on the scoreboard, 6 dead at Hillsborough. I'll never forget that. And I think we knew instantly that it was because of the unsafe ground. Everton had been there the year before for a 3rd round FA Cup game, and it was one of those games in the 80s where I'd spent the whole of the game watching the back of my dad's head and my brother's head, who was younger than me, because I just couldn't bear the thought of losing them in the crowd, given how unbearable it was there. So we knew, all of us who were watching football knew what Hillsborough was like. And then that Saturday, as we got home from Villa Park, my friends returned to the same pub in dribs and drabs, no support, by the way, just left to drift home from a horror scene, an absolute scene of reminiscent of hell on earth. And they were traumatized behind the eyes, and and we knew in that moment. But then obviously we see days later newspapers putting out an alternative version of events. So for me, it was highly personal. It always was, Simon. And I kind of then was at Cambridge at the time, actually, and went back to Cambridge for the summer term after that. And it was like going back to a world where that just hadn't happened. There was just, we'd lived through that in my Easter holidays, and I went back. Nobody was talking about it. Nobody paid any attention to it. The Liverpool fans were to blame for that. And it kind of brought over to me then how this country is two countries, basically. But then all through my kind of journey, it was a radicalizing event in my life. I was aware of Moss Side and Toxteth, but I didn't know anybody who lived there, or I was a young lad at that time. The miners' strike came closer to home because I grew up in the Lee area and I was at school with people whose dads were on strike. What Hillsborough this was now my friends, this was personal. So the 80s kind of came home with a vengeance at that point. And again, I suppose to cut a long story short, I mean, I was a loyal Labour person, if you like, when I was in Parliament, but I also saw, if I can put it this way, I know it annoys people, but the London-centric nature of the Labour Party. And they didn't, when I ever raised this topic, people didn't really want to know. There was a establishment job done on it in 1998 when Labour got into government with a manifesto commitment to do something. I'd gone through all of those years, knowing what I knew. And then fate created a situation where I think Peter Hain had a problem with his expenses. Gordon Brown unexpectedly makes me culture secretary in January 2008. I start attending a huge number of events there because I wanted to support Liverpool 2008, Capital of Culture Year. And the then Lord Mayor of Liverpool, now my counterpart mayor, Steve Rotherham, said, "You're going to have to come to the 20th anniversary." And the thing was, it wasn't like I was an innocent abroad just wandering in my suit into Anfield. I knew everything that it involved going there that day. And I agonized with my family about whether I should go. And it was my younger brother, who's often just a rock of sense, has been all through my political career. He just said, "Look, go if you're going to do something for the families, but if you're not, don't go." And that was the thing, basically, that I'd resolved even before going to attempt to reopen Hillsborough from within the cabinet. But I was at the ground that day with no clearance to be there. I'd called for full disclosure of all Hillsborough papers with no cabinet clearance at all. And then you know what happened. And in some ways, I was like, it was a strange thing, but it was like a relief when people start that cry of justice for the 96. It was like a relief to me because it broke the kind of dam, really. And I was waiting for it to break. And to his great credit, as I walked off the cot that afternoon, thinking that I was in trouble with Gordon and the government and, but not really caring because I'd made that decision to break from it all, he rang me to say how grateful he was that I'd done it and how brave it was. And actually, if I wanted to raise it at cabinet the next day, I could do, which was a massive thing for him to say to me.
Didn't know that.
Yeah, and I did. And I won't go through who said what and all the rest of it because not everybody agreed. But however long I live, Simon, I will never, ever forget Gordon's summing up of that discussion where he just said, "Well, I've heard everyone's views and there are differences, but we're going to back Andy on this." It was the best. It makes me emotional to think about it now because it was the most unbelievable thing that ever happened in my political career. And then, we didn't get anyway, but we got unlawful killing, and that means everything to people up here.
And for those who haven't followed it, when you go back on the 25th anniversary, you have a standing ovation as you walk in, which is, we can see that you were moved by this in those 5 years. It's true to say that everything had changed, and you did play a really major part in that. So you must take some pride from that. Well, I'm sure you do.
No, I do, and
yeah.
I kind of almost think as well, though. I was in a government where an entire English city was crying injustice all those years, and it was almost at the end of that government when something happened, and we have to be honest about that. But no, in some ways that was a change on my journey. I'd been the loyal Labour person, climbing the greasy pole, team player, right, and I just kind of came to a view there where my there was a full-on collision in front of the cop of my professional life and my personal sort of kind of life. And I've described it as when I walked up to speak to the cop that day, I was standing on the edge of the abyss between the government I was in and the people I grew up with. It was that, it was that stark, really. And I guess at that point I kind of left the reservation, if you like, in terms of the Whitehall thing, and I just knew that it just didn't and would never work for the people that I care about, and hence that journey's taken me to where I am now.
Okay, so now a lot of people want to ask lots of questions about being mayor, and so, well, the first thing is, of course, quite a curious question, actually quite funny, is that you were a minister at that time, you're now a mayor. Someone's asking, which do you prefer?
Good question. And I loved many of the ministerial jobs that I did. Huge regard for the civil service, actually, although it may not sound like it. Actually, it's more the structures and the policies that I have a difference with, not the people. I think there's just incredible people in the British civil service. I really kind of threw myself into all of the ministerial roles I do. But to answer the question, I much prefer this role. I think it suits me much more. It is a good thing to start with place first rather than party first. It just is. It's a healthier thing. I'm conscious here that people of all political persuasions have voted for me, and they want me to put the place before anything else and not do the point scoring. But because of that, I think you can just kind of break out of the party line, Simon. You don't have to kind of go with the 3-line whip. You can call it as you see it, and you can be yourself much more. I've said this before, but I think the Westminster system makes frauds out of the people eventually who go there. Not because the individuals are fraudulent. I'm just saying that it makes them look like they're voting in a certain way that they may not fully believe with, or saying things that is not fully reflective of their views, because it works like that. Unlike the American system, where people can be more independent within their parties. I think in the end, MPs don't come over as themselves to the public because they're being forced into certain positions or saying certain things. And I think I was there really on that day when I went to Anfield. That they didn't know me really because of being in that Westminster world for all of those years. And I just feel happier in myself doing what I'm doing now, calling it as I see it, putting the place first. I just think all of that are the ingredients for a more relatable way of doing politics, I think.
I mean, I'm tempted to ask you, do you think you'll be a minister again? But I'm not going to ask you that because I think you'll give a pretty standard answer. But so I want to just read you a very quick quote, and we want to talk about mayors, okay? Benjamin Barber wrote, "If mayors rule the world." I don't know if you read that, but this is a very short quote. He just says, "Mayors are not so much post-ideological as they're actually oblivious to ideology, seeing in ideology an obstacle to governance. Because in a city, governance is about solving problems and making things work." And already you've been talking about, your pleasure from making things work. Does that mean that you have turned your back now on, the ideological battles of the age or of your childhood or youth or early political days?
No, it doesn't. But it's an interesting quote, and I kind of go with it to some degree, but not completely. Is what I would say. In that you do have to be pragmatic. Indeed, Manchester is fabled for its pragmatism. Working with business and across party lines and with any government of the day to move things forward. And I absolutely embrace that approach. And I think it helps all politicians rise in the public's esteem, I think, if you're prepared to work in that kind of more pragmatic way rather than a sort of uber political way all of the time. So yeah, the role does require you to do that. Events do require you just to live completely in the moment, in the real world, and call it in a way that will pull people with you, because you have to do that after the arena that you mentioned. You kind of have to speak, not to make political points, but to the heart of where people are. You have to kind of almost pull people back together, and you can't do that with sort of sound bites or sort of kind of half statements that are a bit sort of hollow. But where I would disagree is the city's ideological, Manchester. If collectivism is an ideology, which I think it is, that Manchester has that in its bones. It's absolutely in its DNA. There's the B is on every bin in Manchester for a reason, and that's because there's a belief here in no one's more important than anyone else. We're all kind of pulling together and doing our bit for the common good, and that's very much the Manchester spirit. We want people to get on in life, but no one, if you walk on by on the other side, the place won't be too kind to you. So it has a belief in solidarity, people standing with another for what's right. No,
Sorry about that.
Is that okay? You could trace it through the things that you mentioned, though. You've got Peterloo just over 200 years ago, where people fought and died for the right to vote on the streets of Manchester. The suffragettes you mentioned. Go back even further than Peterloo. You've got, not quite as far as Peterloo, in the 170 years ago, I think, the mill workers who refused to handle slave picked cotton. And that was Cottonopolis. The workers of Cottonopolis at that time said they would not handle slave picked cotton. And it's why we have a statue of Abraham Lincoln in Manchester. The working men and women of Manchester all those years ago were saying Black Lives Matter, which is kind of incredible, really, when you do my job and you look. But I am forever quoting that history, because you have to, if you do my job, understand where this city has come from and what it's been built on. So there is an ideology there, I would say. It's not a hard line ideology, but it's a spirit of the place that you've got to be true to, and it is ideological in the sense that it's about collectivism.
Fair enough. Now, of course, you mentioned the B, which is Manchester's coat of arms, is it? I don't remember.
It's the city symbol, the worker bee.
It's the city symbol, yeah. And of course, you are the Queen Bee, we would have to say, at the moment. Now, someone has pointed out that Bristol is just doing a referendum at the moment to see whether or not people actually agree with the mayor having I didn't know this, but you probably do, having all the powers they do. Which leads to the question, do you think it's possible to have too much power as a mayor or not?
I don't think the role that I occupy creates that situation, because obviously the mayor in Bristol is for a city council, so it's for an individual council mayor, so it is different. I am the mayor of Greater Manchester, and the body that I chair, the Greater Manchester Combined Authority, is a body that is comprised of the 10 councils. The 10 leaders are the 10 members of the Combined Authority. So in effect, we're a team of 11. We're a Manchester football team. There's 11 of us on the pitch, and my writ does not. There are some things on which I have a mayoral decision, but there are kind of a majority of other things that I have to kind of get a consensus amongst the other 10 to do. And it's different to the GLA. The GLA is sort of above local government in London, whereas my 10 councils are the GMCA. And largely, if we're going to do something, we have to move as one. And the leaders would have to have consulted with their councillors before they come to the Greater Manchester Combined Authority and give me their blessing for a certain policy. So, no, I don't think it is. It places a lot of responsibility to be a spokesperson for the area. But in terms of unbridled power, well, no, I wouldn't say so.
Okay. Fair answer. Now, a couple of points then directly relevant to that. Someone, again, I'm afraid I've already missed your name, so I do forgive me, has asked about, Stephen Heap has asked about, he's asking about driving regeneration in the old mill towns around Burnley. So, again, this is about your role as the greater mayor. And then Andrew Shorthouse, I don't know, but I'm really up on this question, who says he's pointing out that Sheffield, which is my hometown, is a dying city centre, which is absolutely right. I mean, it is dreadful, actually. The only thing, it's almost like you want the Luftwaffe to come back and finish the job, because it's awful. And he's saying, you're talking all about Leeds, Bradford, Manchester, but surely interpennine, transpennine communication between Sheffield and Manchester is equally important. So a bit on how you're regenerating beyond Manchester, and then a bit about what's gone wrong with Sheffield. Why hasn't it gone the way of Leeds, Liverpool, Newcastle, and Manchester?
So really thoughtful questions there. I think on the kind of mills, the northern towns, if you like. I mean, Burnley's outside of our border, but it's close by.
Oh, is it? Okay.
Yeah, but we have Oldham, we have Rochdale. So we have very similar towns within. We are developing now our thinking about how a strong city lifts those towns, and actually it's a town south of Manchester that is starting to prove this. We have the country's first mayoral development corporation in a town centre, Stockport, chaired by Lord Kerslake, and we're very grateful to Bob for lending his heft to this. But Stockport is being completely reimagined, and it's being reimagined on the back of its great connectivity to city centre Manchester. So anyone will know, they go on the West Coast Main Line, you're in Stockport, and then it's next stop Piccadilly, highly connected to the city centre. And Stockport is rethinking the town centre, I think, based on its proximity to the successful city. The council leader likes to say that Stockport is going to be Brooklyn to Manchester's Manhattan, which is maybe a little, certainly a bold claim. Anyway.
Yeah. Ambition.
But actually, the model is working, and if you start to look north, Rochdale has had a huge amount now of regeneration of the town centre, and it's beginning to lift up. And again, it's linked to the connectivity. And we think this is the way to do it. It's partly about converting old retail space into residential. We just don't need the amount of retail space that we've got in our towns, and often it ends up being used for fairly low grade uses. So it's about rethinking the whole place, Simon. Master planning it through the kind of process we're doing in Stockport, and then having good, strong connectivity between town and city. I sometimes worry that the government's levelling up agenda is pitching town versus city, and it really mustn't do that. I'm going to get onto the Sheffield issue in a minute, because it's linked. You've got to lift both together, and we're arguing now for a London-style public transport system in Greater Manchester. I've taken the decision to put buses back under public control for the first time in 35 years. The process formally gets underway on Friday. So franchising starts on Friday. And that will further connect the towns to the city, and then all will rise together in my view. And we'll go on the same journey that London went on 20 or 30 years ago. On the Sheffield point, I think Sheffield's geography is part of its challenge because of the connectivity. It's not, certainly looking west to us, it's not, the best. You mentioned the Snake Pass before, and the rail isn't brilliant as we know. I don't fully know all of the reasons why, but I just think there hasn't been the same sort of culture of collaboration between Sheffield and all the outlying towns. Manchester's been working hard at this for a long time. It's not like it's all just fallen in its lap. It has worked really hard at it, and I'm not saying people haven't sort of worked hard to bring Sheffield forward, but it's about creating a sort of a cluster of a functioning economy that can hold together. The Manchester Council's invested in Manchester Airport all those years ago, Simon, and that was a big thing for us, a very big thing. So it's a longer topic. I'm no expert on your side of the Pennines, so I probably better leave it there.
I mean, fair enough. But you mentioned Bob Kerslake. Of course, he was the chief executive in Sheffield.
He was, and I think Sheffield had more going on, didn't it, about 15, 20 years ago, and it seemed to sort of somehow lose its way. I don't profess to know all of the reasons why that happened. It's got great assets, Sheffield. It could, but I think all of these towns, this is the argument for that railway line that should go to Sheffield as well, by the way, because we did have a plan for the Northern Powerhouse Rail to go to Sheffield. You will lift them all together if you connect them all better. That was the Osborne vision. Bring these great cities of the North closer together and they will rise together. And that's why we're so disappointed with what's been announced. Because Sheffield is cut off as well as Bradford.
Yeah, no, definitely. Now then, it is a health-related audience we have tonight. And so there's quite a few. I was going to ask you about working in health anyway, but Ruth Galetterly, who's a public health physician, She's talking about she mentioned, which we all know, the physical, mental, and financial impacts of inactivity. So physical inactivity as a major public health concern across the country, costing billions. I don't know, perhaps someone says it's 8 billion. I have no idea. I know it's very expensive. But could you just talk a little bit about whether you've, in getting big public health changes in a population, particularly with deprived areas, do you think you're getting the support of healthcare professionals that the topic deserves? Do you find that you do get that, or do you find it disappointing?
No, I think we do get it, but it's getting stronger. The pandemic, I think, has brought the NHS and local government closer together in Greater Manchester. There's a greater sense of one system coming out of this, and a greater emphasis on the everyday, the practical, the social, as opposed to the medical. And so I feel there is an opportunity actually coming out of this. On physical activity, I couldn't agree more. You know, I've always said that we need to go bigger on social prescribing more quickly. You know, don't just nibble at it or just play at it. Get it at the heart of primary care, you know, where we kind of refer people to counselling or exercise or whatever it might be as a first offer, not a sort of an afterthought or a kind of fringe offer. And I'm absolutely confident that that's the way to go. And from your world, Simon, I would like to see the mental health world start promoting physical activity more directly as the first stage of a good mental health policy, because everyone's maybe experienced this to some degree or not over the last 18 months. We've always sold physical activity in this country on its physical health benefits. You'll lose weight, or it'll be good for your heart, or diabetes or whatever. The truth of that might be, well, it probably is true. Of course it's true. But you don't feel those benefits, do you, for years, if you feel them at all? What is absolutely the case is if you take physical exercise, you will lift your mood instantly. You will feel better that day, right there, right then. And that is the big sell, I think, for physical activity. Change how you feel today. Make yourself feel better, more able to cope. And I just think the mental health profession has missed a bit of a trick, I think, with this over the years. Physical activity is the best possible mental health policy. And I just wonder whether we might sell it that way a bit more coming out of this.
Do you think, I mean, elaborate on that. I mean, no one's going to argue with that. Obviously they're not. But I was just thinking how the arrangements in Manchester, because you did lead the way in what will become the integrated care systems that we have now. And I don't quite know what stage you are now in Manchester, but do you think that you are closer to that form of physical mental integration in Manchester than the rest of the country, or is it not working out as you wanted it? Or talk a little bit about how integration's gone, because it has great,
it's a longer journey, is what I would say, Simon, but it's happening. And it has accelerated in the pandemic. I think when people talk about integration, they were always talking about health and social care.
Oh, yeah.
But actually, the real journey of integration is health in all policies, isn't it? You want health to be integrated in everything: children's services, work support. You want it in everything. Is what you need, and I think it's really starting to happen. The change is starting to really come through in Greater Manchester. I'll just give you one example of something that we were doing yesterday. Princess Anne, the Princess Royal, visited us yesterday to come to a project that I've been sort of promoting heavily, and I think partly because of that, she came to visit, which was very good of her. It's called Prehab for Cancer, and basically what this is a physical activity referral run out of our leisure centres that is almost getting people fit for the fight. They've been diagnosed with cancer, they go into this, and it's all about lifting people up, ready, and empowering them. And for me, that's a real change. It's a massive change of the mindset, taking people out of the patient mindset and getting them back into a sort of, you can do this. It's about getting this kind of change where we kind of think you have to wrap people in cotton wool and, get into a much more positive place when it comes to promoting health and fighting ill health. And it's a great scheme. It really is. But I think it embodies a sort of a new way of thinking that we're trying to bring through devolution and Greater Manchester. I think we've been half in, half out, if I'm honest, in the last few years. But I think the reforms that are coming now allow us to have a. Do you remember somebody called Derek Wanless? Do you remember the Wanless report?
Oh yeah.
I bet a few people on this call might remember that. I think I'm right in saying,
including me,
he envisaged a fully engaged scenario. Do you remember? He talked of a health in all policies world where you had a sort of completely different way of promoting health within all public services. And with Sir Richard Lees now leaving Manchester City Council and becoming the first chair of our ICB, I been talking to Richard about this. We want to move to a fully engaged scenario, and I think we can do now through the change that's coming.
Now, you mentioned already, but we can't avoid the other big thing. It's physical, mental, and health and social. I remember you campaigning in 2000 when you were running for leader in 2010 and 15. You did talk quite a good talk on physical, on health and social care integration. But do you think this is just one of those wicked problems that just is never going to happen?
No.
Do you think it is just too difficult? It's just
no.
Politicians are scared of it, or no? You don't think so? Come on, man.
No, I think it's all down to the cowardice of our political parties and of some individual politicians. I do. It's how could it be that the NHS could be created after if we'd had modern politicians trying to rebuild Britain after the war, would we have ever had an NHS? Well, no. I think is the answer to that. Yeah. Somewhere along the line, politicians started to trade in sound bites, not in fundamental policies to please newspapers and get headlines, not policies to change things for the better. And it is a completely fixable problem if there is the political will to do it. And I will never change my view that the only reform is social care on NHS terms, and to really have an entire care system, physical, mental, social, that speaks the same language, where it's all free at the point of use, and everyone contributes, but then everyone's covered for all of their needs. Until we have a system of care in this country that supports people with dementia as well as it treats cancer, we will not have a 21st century ready health and care system. And sadly, here we are, we're 22 years nearly into this century, and we're still in a position where dementia patients, or people with dementia, I should say, are treated as not even second-class citizens, almost non-existent, because they just get wiped out, don't they, by the experience. And it's pretty appalling, actually. It's completely fixable, but it requires a difficult conversation to people to say, we need to take some of your assets to pay. Well, no, actually, we just need to pay for social care in a different way, not in care charges while you're alive, but just in taking a percentage of what you've built up through your life. And actually, by doing that, we can help you protect the 90% that you've worked for and you would quite like to pass on. It's a completely winnable argument, Simon. And I think it's the cowardice of politicians that has failed to make it. It's the shallowness of modern politics is to blame for the failure to reform social care.
Okay, that's a great answer. But it's not happened in Manchester, despite, you are further on in integration. But any evidence of this is actually taking place in any way, or just feel we still haven't made those arguments, I suppose, in this thing?
No, there's real evidence of change. There is. I mean, just a very tangible thing. In the pandemic, our hospitals supported the care homes with PPE, which I don't think was happening anywhere else in the country. It just shows you there's a relationship, is what that shows. We have an integrated digital care record, health and care record for all 2.8 million people in Greater Manchester. I think it's 6 of our councils now are paying the real living wage for social care staff. We've reduced the number of failing care homes quite significantly, partly through NHS support. I wish we could have done more, but we've been doing all this within a very complicated funding sort of landscape. Yeah. And if we had more funding in the system, we would do more. But no, it's happening. But I think, as I say, it's been a half engaged phase, and I think the fully engaged phase might take it on to a new level.
Okay. All right, so it's coming towards the end, but it's Christmas at the moment, and miracles happen.
Does it feel like it to you?
They do. It doesn't feel like it at all, does it? And I don't know if you, yeah, all the people.
Hasn't Boris just delivered our Christmas present tonight at the press conference?
Don't start. Don't start. Every bloody Christmas party I've gone to was supposed to go, has all disappeared. Anyway, but let's say a miracle happens, and when you open your Christmas stocking, you find the Queen has appointed you back to your old job, Secretary of State for Health. Okay. So this is the miracle. You're back and you're now Secretary of State for Health again. And then you wake up and you think, waiting lists are rocketing, new variant, the right-wing press are after the GPs, another NHS reform, children's mental health is a mess. So assuming that you don't shove Father Christmas back up this chimney, which you must be tempted to do, if you were now Secretary of State, where do you start, Andy? Where do you start?
It's a very good. With the staff, you start with the staff, you respect them, you invest in them, you support them. They are the NHS. You start with them and you do whatever you can to listen, support. That's what it's all about, and that's the only way to go. In terms of more broadly, what would I seek to do? Well, I would be very focused on bringing in a national care service, social care on NHS terms. I don't see how this system works until you bring that sort of parity of esteem across the social care and NHS workforce. You basically make them one team around the person, don't you? And you build a system of whole person care where you invest in the staff at every level. So yeah, I learned. If I look back at my time, I think I inherited the tail end of some very good policies from the Labour government. Bear in mind, we did inherit a failing health service in 1997, and it was remarkably different in 2010. Highest ever public satisfaction, lowest ever waiting list. We must have done something right. However, I did inherit an NHS that had become too institutional in its focus as health secretary, too fragmented. In my view, too much emphasis on outsourcing in the private sector. And I look back at all of that and think, actually build a system, don't build individual entities. I mentioned the buses before, Simon. Has deregulation worked in anything? Has the kind of hiving off of social care services made it better? Did deregulation make public housing safer? Look at Grenfell. No. We've lived under this kind of world of the mantra that the market will solve everything. Well, it doesn't, believe it or not. And I think particularly when it comes to the care of people, it really, really doesn't. And I think you need to build a fundamentally different system from the bottom up.
When I was a kid, Andy, that every Sheffield buses, every single journey was 2p, and for my entire childhood, it was 2p. Every from when I was 5 to when I was 18.
Now then, your age, because it was 10p for me to get from Leeds to Manchester. So obviously,
yeah, well, I'm older.
Inflation had kicked in by the 80s.
I know. Now, most important question. Janet Aldrich is very, very persistent. She's asked, I think 3 times. She's noticed the celebration tub behind you.
I know.
Which is your favourite?
Do you know that I knew someone might pick up on that, but this is my my wife works out of this room during the day, and they just banished me up here before. When I came in wet from the M6, they said, don't do it downstairs because we're all watching telly. So I was banished here.
Quite right.
And that is my wife and my kid. My daughters are into those, but I'm quite. I don't really do chocolate and all that stuff. I'm pretty disciplined.
Okay.
I can't claim the same about beer. That's my weakness, but not every night.
Now, stay with me for 1 minute. I need to make just a couple of announcements and then we'll wrap up. But first of all, to everyone, just to remind everyone that tomorrow, our ever popular COVID lunchtime series is leading on the story of the day on Omicron. And we're welcoming back 2 very familiar faces to everybody who follows us. Peter Openshaw, the man who rarely smiles, and John Edmonds, the modeler, the modeler's modeler. So we've got the 2 top people, 12:30 tomorrow, Omicron. God knows what they're going to say about that, but there we go. And next week, instead of Wednesday, next Tuesday, So we're changing the date by one day. Roger is going to be in conversation with Professor Jane Somerville, one of the giants of British cardiology, and many of the audience will probably worked with her actually, or certainly worked for her. And given that whatever parties you planned that evening have almost certainly been cancelled, you all have no excuse for listening in. So Andy, back to you. Now then, so I noticed that you're often called King in the North, and I have to say, I didn't know where that label came from. I thought it was the War of the Roses, but I missed out of all that. But it's obviously on Games of Thrones, and you often call the King of the North, but quick revision shows that they turned out rather badly, most of them, meeting gruesome deaths. How do you think, the last question to you, how do you think your reign as mayor will end then?
Perhaps it's when I try to annex Sheffield. That might be the
yes. Yes. Or when Everton finally get the right manager or something.
Yeah, now you're tempting me into dangerous territory. I'm not sure I'm even king of the place that I'm talking to you from now. I'm not, this title bemuses me. I'm not a Game of Thrones fan, but the more we get these kind of decisions about tier 3 and chopping the railway in half, and I think there may come a day, Simon, where I put the call out across this great place called the North of England, and it'll be a kind of meet at Knutsford services, 9 o'clock Wednesday, and we're going south. We're going to get what's rightfully ours, and maybe that day, one day will come, and we'll.
On the roots of the Chartists or the Jarrow Hunger Marchers, one or the other. Okay. Well, anyway, I'm absolutely sure you will. I mean, I should have said, but if people don't know, you won every single ward, didn't you, in your re-election? All 217, I think.
I did.
That is incredible.
It is, and I'm so grateful to be. As I said before, people of all political persuasions voted for me. I recognise that, and I respect that every single day in the job. But I'll just leave you on this thought, Simon. Westminster politics hasn't worked well for anybody, really, has it? In a long time. We talked about social care and the failure there, but there's many other failures, isn't there? The superficial nature of it. As I say, the casting for headlines rather than bringing forward policies that are right and proper. Failure to take a long-term approach. Ministers in one day, gone tomorrow. How do you, as a rural society, work with that kind of system? This system is inherently flawed, and it is, I'm afraid, London-centric in its thinking. We've got the House of Lords, for goodness sake, where in 2021, people who've never been voted are making our laws, and largely they hail from within the M25. So how can this system deliver for everywhere? In a way, it can't. So the positive to finish on is, maybe open your mind to devolution. I think this is the route, I think, to a country that will be a bit happier with itself. If you've got more agency in life, if you feel you can do more for yourself, you just feel better, don't you? That's a state of mind, isn't it? If you just feel you've got more ability to chart your own course and deal with your own issues, and that's true of places, isn't it? If they have more power to do more for themselves, they would be kind of more energized, better places to live. And I think that is happening in Greater Manchester. When I stood for election in 2017, the most common thing I heard was, it's a pointless job, white elephant, go back to Westminster. That was what everyone said. This time it was, no, we can see this now. And we saw how you stood up for us in the pandemic, and no, this might have something to it. So that kind of has been the experience here. And I think Andy Street has done something of the same in the West Midlands, and Steve Rotherham in Liverpool. Now we've got the first woman Metro Mayor, Tracy Brabin in Leeds. I think this is the route to a country that works better for everybody and everywhere, and it's politics based on place rather than the party line and the 3-line whip, and that is the crucial ingredient, Simon, for a more unifying form of politics. The place is what brings us together. We all care about our places, so start there. People can gravitate towards that, and I think everything can become a bit more positive and bottom up. So there we are. There's a Wednesday night thought, a wet Wednesday night thought for you all. It's fantastic.
I wish you were back living, because I should tell people you lived around the corner from us at the Oval. We still miss you. We genuinely
miss you.
Someone says here, Andy.
I love to Claire.
I will give that Andy for PM, but he won't want it, unfortunately. I hope you do, and one day we shall see. Okay, Andy Burnham, thank you very much. I'm sure you're desperate for some of that chocolates, although you pretend you're not. I'm sure you are. Or a beer.
With all of these doctors on the call, I can't possibly admit to that.
Oh, well, anyway, okay. So thank you very much, everyone. And
thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much for spending your time with us. I know how busy you are, and it's really appreciated.
No, and thanks for yours, and thanks for everybody tuning in. I appreciate it.
Well done. Well done that you finally won last weekend. Well done.
Agent Rafa did the job for us. We're finally happy.
All right. Take care, mate.
Cheers, Simon. Bye, everybody.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks.